Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. And thank you again for joining us for the fourth episode of Where Women Choose to Walk Paths to Improving Cities and Nature. Today, we'll talk about citizen science. What does that term mean? How does it uh, apply or is related to women, young girls, and other groups? So before we begin, a few housekeeping details. This is a safe space. We are recording this. However, if you do not want your voice to be heard or you want to remain anonymous, please feel free to turn off your video, mute yourselves, and just type in your comments in the chat box. If you do have questions about any of the presentations and don't want to interrupt the presentation itself, please type them also in the chat box. We'll be monitoring them. And during the discussion, we ask that you mute your microphones so that we can concentrate on the speakers themselves. And what's really exciting that this is the fourth episode, and we have had participants and panelists from all around the world. So the orange dots represent our former panelists and participants, and the yellow dots represent new countries and where they're joining us from today. So I am being, my co-host today is Dr. Adrina Berdecci from Canada, a good friend, mentor, fellow author, and she and I will be tackling this subject, and it's one that we admittedly do not know too much about. And what's exciting about today's episode, aside from the fact that Adrina and I don't know anything about, citizen science, is that typically we have panelists that represent different parts of the world. Today, our panelists come from one place, Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. And our panelists today will include Veronica Nieto from El Valor, Trinity Pierce from the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, and our very first male panelist, Mike Rizzo, with whom I work at the U.S. Forest Service International Programs. So welcome. What does citizen science mean? As I mentioned, I don't know too much about it. All I know is when I was a little girl, I was allowed to think big about what I wanted to be. So since I was 5, apparently, I wanted to be, wait for it, a scientist truck driver. Not necessarily sure what that meant. People kept asking, what does that mean? And I sometimes would say, well, I want to be a truck driver by day and a scientist by night. Or, a scientist inside a truck driving it to the masses, which, as we know now, there are lots of mobile science classrooms out there, like the BioBus in New York or Eureka in Jordan. So it wasn't such a far-fetched idea, but back in the early 80s, it was. And here I am with my best friends in the 4th grade at the University of the Philippines Elementary School. We were nerds and know-it-alls, and we loved science. So I was that kid that was really annoying, okay? And if you can guess who I am, double points for you. But I love science. I sat at the front, I took copious notes, and I would recite them ad nauseum to my family. So there I am. I don't know if you guessed that. Where I lived was a subsidized teaching housing development. And my father was a professor at the University of the Philippines. And so we had a nice little duplex bungalow that abutted large rice fields. And beside the rice fields were barangays. And barangays are similar to barrios. And a lot of them were of more under-resourced, lower income families, many of whom could not afford to send their kids to public school because in the Philippines, public school, you still had to pay tuition. So there were a lot of kids my age at that time running around, and many of them were actually my friends. I would take public transportation. There were no school buses, so I would have to, at the age of 7 or 8, take my little peso, take the jeepney, and get down about a mile away from my house to play with those kids. And then I'd invite them over, and guess what I would do? Yep, science. So my mom one time said, you know what, why don't you guys raise some, mung beans? And I'm like, ooh, yes, I don't have to eat mung beans. Good. So what we did instead was plant little mung beans and put them in different light conditions. And I would act as the know-it-all nerdy little teacher at 9 years old. And I would draw diagrams like the one below. This was not my diagram. It wasn't as pretty. And teach my little students who came over, and my classes grew. So I had, at one point, had 20 students under me, and I would teach them what I had learned in school that morning. And then they would teach me. They would talk to me about how to plant these mung beans afterwards. I had a garden in the back that my parents cultivated, and they would say, ooh, look, they are co-planting this tomato with this petchai, and that's a good fit, or this is what you want to put in your soil. So there was this great exchange of information at the age of 9, and we were all budding little scientists. So as I pondered what citizen science was in the past few weeks since the last episode, I kept thinking, well, I don't know too much about it, but has it been around for a while? The answer is yes. In fact, before science became professionalized in the different topics like astronomy or biology, ecology, science was in the hands of the people. It was really the citizens' science. So even 2,000 or more years ago in China, for example, farmers were noting and observing when locusts were coming, and they were jotting that down. In Japan, they would take a look at when the sakura, the cherry blossom trees, would peak. And over the years, that kept growing until the 1600s, when scientific societies arose out of the need to share. Because science, in many ways, even though you picture the scientist as this lone nerd in their laboratory, it's actually a very communal and participatory process. So scientific societies arose, and they were mainly men, and they excluded a lot of other communities. Now, we also know that back then, there wasn't any real peer-reviewed standards yet, none of the rigorous scientific research that's happening now. We had a lot of observation, and we saw that with a lot of the notes, the prolific notes that a lot of citizen scientists were taking. Take Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden Pond. He took copious amounts of notes about nature, about leaves, about the trees around him. Charles Darwin was also another citizen scientist. He wasn't a biologist by trade. We also had a lot of women who stayed at home but were observing birds. And so in the 1900s, in fact, a lot of birders and amateur ornithologists, they started a lot of these professional societies. Citizen science really began in the United States with the Audubon Christmas bird count, for example. So that's been going on since the 1900s. And let's take it all the way to the modern age, where now citizen scientists are networked. They're networked globally across topics, and then they're networked within topics. So where are we today? Well, ever since science has been professionalized, now there's a little bit of a tension between citizens and what the data that they gather and their validity, and I guess the expectation of how accurate this data was versus the data in more traditional research. And by traditional, I'm talking about things that are happening in labs, in research halls, etc. But what I wanted to stress is, and for me, citizen science is always going to be citizens' science. an inclusive, participatory form of observing the natural world around you. One that can include youth, the elderly, all types of backgrounds and income levels, educators, families, communities of color, and amateur scientists. So there's really no big need to have this tension. There is room for both. Citizens plus science can come from the people and make it for the people. And then in the 1990s, when it was coined citizen science, I was formalizing something that was more informal in its approach. There's room for them as well to have folks actively participate with scientists doing research on the ground. So why is it important to me? Citizen science is a great way to bridge the disconnect and the disbelief often that comes with what comes out of science and the citizens themselves and lawmakers and policymakers. Like justice, it is blind. Everyone is welcome to participate. It is more transparent. And in many cases, we've seen where data from citizen science has actually held a lot of research that's been included or that's been worked on and conducted and shown their inaccuracies. It's inclusive. For someone like me, as a 9-year-old know-it-all, it was very empowering. It's easy to participate, and now you can use your smartphone. You can use these apps. You can use paper and pencil. It's easy to be part of a citizen science project. And what I love most about it is really it takes us to the grassroots level, that it takes us from this elite concept of what science is. And these, scientific societies in the past, you could only speak in Latin, apparently. This is what I read yesterday. I can't even speak my own language properly. So Latin was it was off-putting. It was, excluded people. But now you put it in the hands of the grassroots communities, and you allow them to determine what is it that needed to be studied. It's also important for me from a woman's perspective. There's a lot of lack of sex disaggregated data out there, meaning that, for example, with COVID-19, we don't know too much about how COVID-19 has really affected women and girls, because a lot of countries either have not provided that data or they have not conducted that research yet. For a long time, as I mentioned, women and young girls were excluded from the scientific community. So I love this inclusion of them. And citizen science allows one to lower the barriers to participation. It makes it easy for young girls to be involved, for women to be involved. And in cities, especially among urban youth, it can start in one's own backyard. And I think Mike will talk about that and with Veronica and Trinity. It's a great way to narrow the gap, especially with nature. A lot of kids in the city don't have access to nature-based programs or to be able to go hike in the national forest. This is a way to bridge that gap. And it fosters environmental awareness. So these are my two kids. The one on the left is Teo. He's now currently 8. And the one in the middle is Sebastian, who's now currently 13. And before Sebastian became a teenager, we were still able to all hang out and do science Sunday. So now it's just me and Teo, and we would make things like refrigerators out of clay pots, soil erosion experiments, and a bunch of other things, grow things in the garden, take note of birds, but we really love bugs the most. And then we would go on bio blitzes, and some of these experiments ended up at scientific expos that our Office International Programs participated in with schools in the DC area, for example, or New York, or in Chicago. And it was a great way to bond with them and to make them more aware of the world around them. And I think what's really great is now I'm known in this community of mine in Northern Virginia as the science mom. And folks will come up to me, uh, friends of Sebastian and Teo, and say, "Hi, Sebastian's mom. Hi, Teo's mom. What science stuff are you going to do with us this summer?" And until the pandemic hit, we did invite the community to be part of this because we wanted to encourage science and environmental awareness. So that's my little story of why I love this topic so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. And then I'll turn it over now to my colleague and dear friend, Adrina.
Thank you so much, Liza, for that introduction and your personal stories. This is such an exciting topic. I mean, when we first started exploring the idea of this topic, we started with the question just amongst ourselves, right? Like, what does citizen science mean to you? And as Liza mentioned, we came up a little short. We were like, I don't know, what does this mean? And we looked into it, and I mean, it's true. There's really I don't know much about science, citizen science either. So it's been this incredible learning experience for Liza and I to prepare for this panel. And we're really excited to learn from our panelists and our participants today for sure. What I did know, and Liza mentioned this, is the dominant narratives, I think, in citizen science have been essentially data collection, monitoring and documentation, and active participation. And I think the less obvious narratives is that, and we discussed this in some of our preliminary conversations with Mike and Trinity and Veronica, is that conservation is happening at home, and it's not being documented, but it's still citizen science, and it can be part of family and community culture that speaks to these oral traditions and learning, and more importantly, passing those traditions on down to our children. And it can strengthen family ties and bridge those cultural differences in communities that Liza mentioned earlier. What's interesting for me are also the language constructions around it. And I had heard the term citizen science, and through our preliminary discussions, I learned that this language is shifting a little bit so that it's being referred to as community or participatory science. And these terms are being used more broadly to make distinctions between community participation and citizenship as it relates to nationality and again, what impact that might have cross-culturally. So it's this interesting shift that's happening, and it's I think a broader way to think about citizen science. When I was growing up, my exposure to nature was really through my grandparents' garden. I had a family that was very supportive in things we wanted to do, but coming from kind of a traditional, conventional Armenian background, environmental conservation wasn't really an active and intentional part of our upbringing. So my sister and I we would just play. We would play outside. We'd play in the flower beds. We'd count bugs. We'd try to catch birds. Um, and we grew up mostly in the city, and half the year we would spend in Italy for my dad's work. So during the months that we were in Italy, and that was about the first 10 years of my life, we were exposed to a different climate and different species of plants and flowers, and which we couldn't recognize, but our activities were the same, just investigating those outdoor spaces that were around our homes. So that was sort of how I began to appreciate and touch nature, but again, certainly not intentionally, with someone directing us. And when I began my research and my work in urban forestry, my exposure to applied science was really specifically through trees and conducting inventories and measuring trees and learning their names and thinking about their presence and their heritage and stories, and how they're often um, the piece that connects communities in a lot of ways. And that's been my experience in urban forestry. And later, as my journey in my career expanded into social sciences, I really began to appreciate the connections that we're talking about today that Liza described. But I didn't think of it within sort of the framework of citizen science. So it's been really it's been interesting. And in 2017, I was invited by the U.S. Forest Service to their inaugural urban forestry seminar as the Canadian representative. And this is where I met Liza and Mike for the first time. Changed my life in so many ways. So happy to have had that experience because it really opened my eyes to this new world and way of doing things, and the relationships between different government agencies and different community groups. And it's very different than the way things operate in Canada and in the experiences that I've had. So these concepts around citizen science and non-traditional partnerships I've brought back to my work in Canada, and I'm so grateful for that. And I'm going to share after that experience, I was asked to develop an introductory video, and I'm just going to share that in the chat with you all for your interest because it talks a little bit more about that seminar. So one morning we went to we spent a morning at El Valor, which is a nonprofit social service agency with programs focused on engaging adults and children, and communities are mainly comprised of immigrant families, mostly from Mexico. And you're going to hear a lot more about this today from Mike and Veronica, but I was really moved by the use of symbolism and the integration of environmental art, using these cultural connections and celebrations, and that really spoke to me. As many of you who do know me, my previous life before forestry was in the arts and creative writing. So this kind of bridge of those things, that creative pieces that resonate with communities and families that don't necessarily think of applied science, and bridging those things, I think really it spoke to me, and again, it's something that I like to bring back to my work. So I'm really excited about this panel. Happy to also share that Veronica just told me that the Children's Center at El Valor, the programming supports now over 1,000 families that train together, and parents are valued as a child's first teacher. And as a result, there's really a lot of importance placed on family engagement in knowledge sharing and learning the learning process. So on a personal level, I think reflecting on my own role at home, I try to ensure that our daughter has these experiences more intentionally than when I was growing up. And hopefully she won't grow up with an irrational fear of spiders or bugs as a result. But opportunities to continually learn about and touch nature are important. And I think that the self-awareness that anyone and everyone can and should have these experiences really integral to bridging those communities, to fostering innovation and inspiring career opportunities, especially for girls and young women. And seeing more women enter the field of urban forestry and natural resources more broadly has really been inspiring for me, especially raising daughters. And looking at it from a mom's point of view has deepened my appreciation for community building and non-traditional partnerships. So sharing stories and creating an international network and community of practice is one of the reasons why Liza and I started this series. And we're excited, as I said, to kind of learn from you all and hear from you today. So there's a number of topics. Liza, can you switch the slide? There's a number of topics and questions that we want to explore with you all today. And these are just sort of prompts for the discussion. We don't necessarily intend to go through them one by one, but we wanted to kind of present these as just for broader dialogue. So what does it mean to be a citizen scientist? Who can do science? I mean, is anyone too young or too old to do science? What is citizen community participatory science? Again, what does it mean cross-culturally, and what are some of the different types of activities that this can include? Is citizen science real? Is it effective science? We've kind of heard, well, this isn't, it's not validated because it's not done by the applied scientific community, but we're seeing that that's certainly not the case. How can citizen science empower individuals and communities? So who's included and who's excluded with respect to language and practice? How can people get seen, and how can voices be heard with respect to activism and advocacy? And this is really about social and environmental justice, I think, and this topic presents a vehicle to discuss that. How is citizen science practiced at home with respect to parent engagement, let's say? What is the impact to families? What is citizen science from a parent's perspective? And how has technology impacted these activities? And lastly, why is citizen science important for women? So these are, again, we just present these as some topics to frame our discussion today. We're very grateful to our panelists for sharing their time and their insights on this topic. Thank you so much, Mike and Veronica and Trinity, for being here today. Mike in particular works with many, many non-traditional partners. When I first met Mike, I was so impressed and humbled by the care with which he spoke about and practiced his work, and the people with which he worked, and the communities. And it just really, again, changed the way I thought about collaboration and the partners that we've been developing here through my work in Canada. So it's a pleasure for me to welcome you today as our first speaker and as our first male panelist in the Where Women Choose to Walk series. Mike, thank you for being here, and I'm turning the floor over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Adrina. Thanks, Liza. Yeah, so the first male panelist has been as Liza during the initial invitation. At first, I was reluctant to join, and I was like, "What am I going to say? What am I going to contribute?" But I think I'm excited to participate. I know a number of the participants here in the webinar. If I kind of share my story, what I learned along the way, perspectives from a land management agency. For folks who don't know me, this isn't going, the presentation isn't about an overview of every citizen science program, how to join one, whether it Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, eBird, there's so many. So I will mention some programs that we've used as tools to connect with people. But I also, as Adrina and Liza had initially opened up about, it's not just about, citizen science to me, and I agree, it could be that formal data collection research project that is very community driven, but also just what is a scientist? And it's something I guess I knew along the way, but really honed and really reconsidered when I started working with Veronica and her team at El Valor. A number of our colleagues are on the line. By way, I guess, of intro, following Liza and Adrina's the pattern. So I grew up in the middle of Chicago, and we did have parks, but we played a lot in the street, in the alley, between buildings, and the railroad tracks. I was very fortunate. I was able to visit family outside of Chicago now and then. When I was young, my grandparents would take me to Mexico as a child. And in those days in the 70s, a 3-day bus ride. And so I'd be at the window watching the transition from Illinois, where it's green and farmland, through desert, mountains. And then, so I got to play outside a lot. So I had a different perspectives of different areas. And then the what did you want to be when you grew up? I think, Liza, thanks for sharing that. I was a nerdy little kid, as you mentioned, and nerds, we were nerds, and I was excited to learn, but I was excited to play outside. And I went to a small Catholic school, Immaculate Heart of Mary, and Sister Nazarene in the 3rd grade. What do you want to be? Well, I was fascinated by trains. That's what I saw in the city, subways and trains. And I wanted to, not even to be the engineer driving the train, but working with the hammers fixing the rails. That was my dream when I was 8 years old. And as we were talking about, and I think Veronica will talk about this more, I'm first generation university student, so I didn't relate to college from whether at 8 years old all the way up until I really got to college. I was there like, what do I do now? Pick a major and stumble around a bit till I figured it out. And Adrina, you mentioned about working in the outdoors. I think for a number of us as first generation university students, a number of us from families that have immigrant backgrounds, college is looked at as an investment. If you're the fortunate one to be one of the first to go, it's an investment for the entire family. And medicine, law, engineering, maybe business, and that is that's what you want to do. And I remember I was working in Mexico as in the 90s and visit my grandfather on the weekends, and he was upset. I'm scruffy working, doing field work. In his mind, I needed a coat and tie in an office. May you rest in peace. He understood before he passed that I was choosing my destiny and working on my terms. And so he supported me. But in the beginning, he told me, drop out of school, go on the harvest, pick crops. He goes, you want to work outside, go live in the fields. Because he grew up on a farm. And it was hard to relate. So that is, and then in turn, this is, as we go through the presentation and the story, these are the families that I work with now, working with El Valor. So I'm going to share the presentation right now. And ideally, let me see, let me get here, sound, share sound, and I'll confirm. Okay, can you confirm you could see the presentation?
Yes, Mike, you're on.
Perfect. Okay, so I will be presenting, I'm going to give an initial overview from a land management agency, from the Forest Service, bringing in some of my background, but also looking as the story unfolds, as we came up with this sort of style for working with communities. I learned a lot. I'm honored to present with Veronica Nieto and Trinity Pierce, who are important colleagues and partners. And I think more importantly for me as a person, not just as the Forest Service, I want to be considered a good partner. So I need to learn, come in and tell folks, hey, this is the way you do it. It's a constant learning and communication process. And that's what I've learned or really honed along the way. So I threw in a couple of Forest Service slides for folks. I think everybody knows who we are, but we're a land management agency, national forest, grasslands, used to work at the forest level. Did some community engagement, but if you want to use traditional in quotes, that is, like there's a formulaic approach, working with youth and citizen science, getting data recorded. But working for the Forest Service, as we're going to what's instilled in us, it's caring for the land and serving the people. That's the motto for the agency. And I remember I stole the where they live is what Lynn Westfall of research says. And so the community level, how do you connect with communities? And that is something that I learned a lot. I thought I knew how when I was working at the forest level, but how do you really connect with people? Is it realistic to expect everybody to get out to a national forest, national park? There's a lot of initiatives, every kid in the park, every child in the park, and I support them. But when the national forest is 50 miles away, 1,000 miles away, how realistic is it? How accessible is it for everybody? So I'm very focused on the community level aspects of things. And again, when I talk about citizen science, it isn't just a data collection. It's also sort of cultivating, honing the skills of children and youth and adults as scientists. So along the way, I joined the International Programs Office, where I find myself now. I work on the Urban Outreach and Partnerships Unit, but I provide a lot of support for the Latin America program and the Migratory Species program. So we have a lot of elements woven together in my work and Liza's work and how we work. And a big part of it is of this migratory species, habitat, but education, outreach, there's a lot involved with it. And so I'm based in Chicago, but these partnerships span around the globe, in this case, in North and South America. So it's about habitat. That's when I work with the scientists. It's about habitat. Monarchs, birds, bats, you name it. We could be talking about water, we could be talking about trees, ecosystems, but I just generically say habitat. And this is what I already knew this, but I honed this along the way. It's also about people. And we're going to visit this. This is a beautiful parade, and there's a lot more behind. There's cute photos of children and parents in costumes, but it tells us a lot. And Veronica is going to tell us a lot more. And this is what I learned working with El Valor, is that it isn't just about a cute child in a costume. There's a lot behind their science, community buy-in, and that sort of thing. And Veronica will talk a little bit about that. But so I didn't know it was about people. It isn't just my background is in social science, anthropology. That's what I do. It's about people. So here I am working for land management agency, natural and protected areas, just the way we say it around the globe, national forests, national parks. But what does it really mean? You live in a city. I grew up in an area just like this. This photo is actually in the South Bronx, and some of the folks on the presentation have been there with us on some site visits when they've been in the US with us. what does it really mean? So here's the challenge. You have this industrial, there's post-industrial, it's just heavy residential buildings. How do you foster a strong connection? And we talk about citizen science. Yes, there's the formal programs, but also cultivating scientists, just observation skills. And so that's one way, education, right? So that's the model, the traditional model I followed. Let's start with education. And then this is a slide from the Peggy Note of Art Nature Museum. I like it. You use what you have, outdoor labs, urban areas. Here it's underneath a bridge, a railroad trestle. There's Des Plaines River running through. Bring kids out there and use it. So again, this is still very youth focused where I'm at right now. And as I'm walking down this path and like, wow, this is great. And then for me, which is near and dear to my heart, and Adrina touched on it, community level partnership. So here we start with education, and then the other solution, I guess. And again, I look at everything as woven together, almost like a braid or a braided rope, braided hair. And so community level partnerships with education, we start throwing in citizen science a little bit later, but fostering these community level partnerships. How do you do it though? So this is at the goal, the end result. What are we looking at? We want to get communities, people engaged with conservation. We want them involved from the Forest Service perspective. We want them aware. We want them participating and ultimately kind of communicating it out there. So that's our goal, engaging science, monitoring, and citizen science as a formal program theoretically lends itself well to that. So what is citizen science? And Adrina threw out a bunch of questions. There is that sort of, the data collection, but I think it starts at observation. Everybody's doing this. We're observant in our world, some at different levels than others. Something I learned very well at El Valor is that, we talk about children are born scientists. And what do? We stifle it. Sit down, you're going to get dirty. Don't go there, you're going to get wet. You're going to ruin the clothes. And I've learned a lot from that. I have a daughter, and I think we have a slide, and she'll be in there a little later, but let her play. We've never passed the puddle. We couldn't jump. And that's the building blocks for this. But what is citizen science? There's the formal data collection. The Monarch Joint Venture is just one definition. There's many. And using it interchangeably with community science, which is probably growing or has grown in use, it's involving public and private and scientific research, observation, some data collection and monitoring, and then uploading it. And so I have that lens coming into the partnership in Chicago. It's like, all right, we could start to set the building blocks and lead to data collection. And just to give you some great, some examples, I'm not going to go through, how to participate, but some examples, and they're global. It isn't just the US. Here, Correo Real or Royal Mail for monarch butterfly observation in Mexico, monitoring. You can see the names and the number of reports. Very successful program in Mexico. It's almost 30 years old at this point. One of the original citizen science, started as a pen pal postcard program. Now it's online. And I think Tatiana's on here, the Programa de Aves Urbanas, the urban bird program in Mexico. And now in Central and South America, some 125 cities, 110 or more in Mexico alone, and then it's grown to Guatemala and different countries, in Colombia and Ecuador and so these are very successful, engaging people in the outdoors. You can see everybody's outside in a protected area near an urban center in the state of Mexico, but sharing observations, sharing data, communicating. That's the beauty of it, but also uploading data that is used by eBird and other programs. So as I mentioned, the work in the city, citizen science is an engaging program. There's a lot of challenges. This is back in the South Bronx. Scrap metal yard is actually on the Bronx River, just above the East River. So what do you do with this? Well, you turn in an opportunity. Rocking the Boat, one of our partners in the South Bronx, youth bird monitors, data collection. So they figured out a way to get youth involved. Youth, barely access to this river. They created a path to get to the river, teaching youth about sailing, boats, rocking, data collection. This gets shared with Audubon, it gets shared with eBird and Cornell, and then ultimately with the scientists. So I'm just giving you some great examples. So coming in Chicago, working with Avalor in the beginning, that's what I came in. I'm going to integrate them into these networks. And that's what it's about. The impact, it isn't just about the South Bronx. It isn't just about the cities, for example, with the POW program. It's about connecting them in data collection that leads to management decisions. And that's the successful citizen science. People want to hear what the impact is of their data that's collected. And so I come in thinking, all right, well, maybe I can introduce El Valor to this. So that's what I come in, engaging communities. And we're going to get El Valor in this network. Here's some partners in Mexico and Chicago also in these photos. Engaging community, education, citizen science. And I'm ready to go, right? And so, you know, pausing the citizen science, my director and I met with the El Valor leadership team. I don't know, I think it was in 2008. We had already been partnering with them for a number of years, but the adults program in middle school. And the vice president at the time says, you know, we really want to strengthen this partnership, but I want you to work with the Head Start and Early Head Start program, which is preschool level for those not from the US, and birth to 5. And I'm just looking like, huh? And my boss director says, yeah, he's got it. And I remember showing up and I know Vero's here and Nina, some of the others. I remember showing up and just seeing this long table of teachers looking at me. Later, they told me they're shaking their heads like, what's in store for us now? I'm like pretty much trembling. What do I know about preschool? And that's how I looked at it. It's preschool. And so I said, all right. And Veronica will tell you more about what that program entails. And I said, all right, let's go with the formulaic approach. We'll train the classroom teachers who will train youth. That'll be the model we'll use. So that's what we did. And how do we do it? I can't be in every classroom. So we trained teachers through environmental education. These photos at the University of Minnesota, which is expanded with UW-Madison and the Monarch Joint Venture, train the teachers, expand the outreach. I'm thinking, you know, wow, this is going to be successful. And so classroom teachers. And this works also for middle school, high school, and other ones. I'm just focusing on the El Valor case study at the moment. It's great. The teachers loved it. They taught about native plants, about butterflies. These are 2-year-olds. These are 3- and 5-year-olds. It worked out well. But was it impactful for what we were looking for? And so this is the question I pose that complements some of Adrina's questions. Is classroom outreach truly an engaged community? Is a citizen science program truly, I think there's individuals who are engaged, but are you really engaging the community, which was my goal, which was established as part of my work plan with the Forest Service. So is that the result? So I'm going to transition to and pass to the microphone, so to speak, to Veronica Nieto, El Valor, to talk about how the program, the impact. So how I learned from, Sara's here, the whole team. How did I learn from this team, from Head Start, Early Head Start, preschool level education program, where the success really exploded? I had to sit and take a breath. It wasn't no longer about citizen science. It was no longer about conservation only. It was not only about classrooms. It was integrating a lot of elements that I knew was out there, and I did integrate into my programs before, but not in the way that I learned from our partners. So, Vero, are you ready? Just call out when you'd like me to change the slides, please.
Okay, I'm good, Mike. Well, thank you. Just want to, before we start a little bit about El Valor, I wanted to talk a little bit about also my history or my story, right? Where I come from and my background. When we're talking a little bit about citizen science. I came here very young to the United States. My parents were first immigrant, and I was a generation. I was, as a very young age, I have very small memories of myself exploring out in nature in Mexico from Veracruz. And I have very small, vague memories of when I played outside in the hills, and my parents had a farm. We raised chickens, we had dogs. So, I would have had a very good exposure to the outdoors. And when I came to the US, everything changed for me. I didn't have that exposure. My parents were very protective because we didn't have the language. So it was a huge barrier for them. My sister and I became translators in a lot of things for them because they didn't know what to do in certain situations. So they didn't speak the language, and we supported. And my vague memories of really exploring the outdoors when being here in the US was going to the zoo, right? Exploring with my parents on the weekend and going out on a little nature walk at the zoo. But really it was very minimal, not much exposure to science or the outdoors in general. So it was really, for me, it was very impactful because as I developed and went to college, thinking of what careers should I choose, what path am I taking, right? Kind of like what you said, Mike. It was my expectation as my parents to say the science to them was the medical field. Science to them was becoming a doctor or becoming a nurse, because that's what they knew of science. So those were the paths and those were the experience that I was going to take myself. But just life in general changed it all. And I ended up in early childhood education because I wanted to be part of supporting other families. I felt that my parents maybe didn't have support because we were here by ourselves. We had no other family. And it was very challenging to have support in case something happened to ourselves. We didn't have anyone to stay with. So I saw the challenges that they faced, and I said, I want to work with the community and help other parents make connections or know where to go or challenges to do. And I think being part of a velour encompasses all of that, because I see that in a lot of our families that we serve, right? A lot of our families that we serve in a velour are immigrant families and have those same barriers that my family had. So, you know, it makes that big connection of exposing your children and what is science. Science is much bigger than just being a doctor or nurse, right? It could be a biologist, could be anything they want in life. And there's lots of great things to do in science and in relation to nature. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my story and my background, and I'm really passionate about working with the parents and letting them know that, you know, there's lots of opportunities for our children, and this is a great start. The early Head Start programs and Head Start programs that we serve is a great start to commence. Like you said, Mike, it's you know, bringing it into the classrooms and elementary age, and children participate and they learn and they explore about nature. But more impactful is when you bring it into the home, into the families, and families can share their stories with their children. So you can go ahead and you can change the slide for me, Mike. So this is a picture of one of our centers, El Velour, initiated by a mom who, for the love of her child, her son had a special need. And back in the 80s or early 70s, there were no services for children with different abilities. And she fought for her son, and she fought so that he can have services and live in the community with other children who didn't have special needs. So she was able to get a loan and start her small childcare or daycare, you want to call, in a basement where it was not just children with special needs, but children of all abilities, right? And thanks to her involvement in the community, and thanks to her pushing and thriving, today we have 4 children's centers. We serve a lot of communities in different parts of Chicago area, predominantly low-income families, and they bring their children to us, and we serve children with all abilities. It's an inclusive center, right? There is no children, there's nothing any child can do. There are really no limitations. They all have different ways of exploring things and learning. So these are just a little pictures about some of our families that we serve in the community, and how we support them, right? It's all about fostering creative and innovative child development. It's all based on parent relationships. And our programs that we serve are early Head Start programs and Head Start programs. The early Head Start program serves children from birth to 3-year-olds with a home visiting model. Teachers go out to the home and provide a service based on education, right? Supporting the family if a child maybe needs, you know, more support in how to crawl, or a baby, talking about when do you start feeding a baby, or for first-time moms or moms who just have, you know, more children or more experience, but you still need that support. So that's the early Head Start program. And the Head Start program are servicing children from 3 to 5-year-olds, which are in the classroom setting. And again, we're looking at the child's development, language, and building on culture. But both of the programs not only serve just the looking at the Head Start piece or looking at the education piece. Head Start and Early Head Start is about the family. So also supporting the family if they need a resource, if they're looking for getting a job, how can we refer them somewhere? If they're looking at building on skills or going back to school, how do we support the family? So it's not about just the child, it's about the whole entire family. And that's kind of like what we looked at it when we got together with Mike, right? It's about, yeah, we can teach our children about insects or plants in the classroom, but how can we bring this to the parents? Because if the parents support us, then the parents will support the child, and the parents will learn. And it's a parallel process of learning with child learning and parent learning, right? So it all begins there. And how do we hype up everybody? How do we motivate everybody to be excited about learning about monarchs and learning about trees? And how do we do that, right? So it starts since the front door with our receptionist, right? We decorate, we hype up everybody when it's the monarchs coming back to Chicago, migrating. We work with the children outside, releasing butterflies when we raise them in the classrooms. So, right, it's how do we motivate everybody? And I think motivating the children and seeing their faces and all the excitement, I think parents get hyped up. Right? I think as a mom, I see my child very happy and she really likes this, and I want to be part of it, and I want to show her that I can do it too, right? And we can do it together. So it begins from there. It begins from the children and the families. You can go ahead and change mic. And then how do we strengthen the program with getting the parents to go out and just their own community? Like, you know, like I said, my exposure was going to the zoo, and that was pretty much the exposure I had, or it was either playing in an empty lot with a neighbor that we had in an empty lot next door. But how do we get the parents to connect at home and in your own environment, just walking outside? So taking your little ones, going outside and exploring, talking about what they see, because, you know, children learn through sensory. We're encouraging vocabulary. We encourage language development, and we encourage parents that their primary language spoken at home is the primary language you want to really speak to your child in. They will learn another language, but the goal is that, you know, children learn the vocabulary and the words in their home language. And just that reminded me of the picture, because I know in this picture, mom is an English speaker mom and dad was Spanish speaking. So mom and dad really worked hard with the child here. I remember they did a big poster, and they talked about how dad would read in Spanish and talk about the monarchs and talk about everything in Spanish, and mom would do everything in English, to making sure that the child is learning vocabulary, but yet keeping it all together, right? And that this child is able to maintain his home language. And then the picture on the left, that's Mike's daughter, right? Teaching about it's okay to get your hands dirty and it's okay to explore. There are some children that, right, don't want to touch or have that sensory issues, and that's okay. It's okay. It's what they want to explore, and that they're young scientists, and that they too can be part of this in the community, whether you're being in a community garden or you're going to teach your child to go outside and just walk and let's see the trees, or let's hug a tree, right? So it's learning to do all that with your child and connecting that in your own environment. The other thing that was with Laura was, how do we get right? So when we introduced this project to the parents, it was more of, well, you know, if they hear it from me, I work for the agency. So, you know, they might be, you know, thinking, well, she works here, right? They're going to want to, you know, teach us whatever they're working on, right? So it was getting also leaders in the community within our own parents. So our agency has each center or each community that we serve, we have a community partners with parents, and they're the leaders. They're the ones that take on our parent meetings on a monthly basis. They lead the meetings. They're advocates. They support the parents. And we went and said, well, let's talk to the parents. Let's talk to the leaders, so that the leaders can support us and teach other parents to buy into this, topic of monarchs or conservation. And we had our challenges because there were some parents that said no, right? We've been doing, participating in this, and for our events or our things, we want to keep them this way. So we had some barriers. It wasn't at the beginning where, everyone was accepting of it. And it was okay. And it was working together and dialoguing and talking about, well, maybe we can meet halfway. Maybe we can start this way and navigate this way, right? So we did have some stronger leaders that said, well, yeah, we can talk to parents, and we'll continue to talk to parents and talk about this science and what our children are learning and doing. And one of those moms, you'll see in the video, Señora Manjares, her children were in our program for the early Head Start program and the Head Start program. And she started as a mom on our committee, and bought into the monarchs, and she had her own stories. And she said, well, yeah, I knew about the monarchs. My family's from Michoacan, and we know about the monarchs, but we really never bothered to see what they do or how they grow. So she really took on a lot with her children about the monarch. And during the years, she was raising monarchs herself at home, like nothing. Raising 20, then she started at 30, 40, 50. And I know they continue to be part of raising monarchs. Her family was all part of it. When her family was here from out of town from Mexico, they wanted to make sure when the monarchs were going back that they were making it back. And when they were leaving to Mexico, they were, insisting on her, telling her, oh, should we take some back with us? Because we want to make sure that it gets to the reservation, right? So it was not just her family and her children. It was her mother, her sisters, everyone being involved and really being more aware of science and being more aware of nature. So she was a big impact, and today she still participates with us. Today she volunteers and comes in and does many things with us, and she's still raising her monarchs. Mike, if you want to go ahead and play the video.
Mi nombre es Marta Manjarres y soy madre, parte de las familias de aquí del Valor. Y pues mi experiencia en este proyecto se resume en muy pocas palabras. Lo que empezó como un proyecto, una actividad que hicieron mis hijos aquí para aprender sobre el proceso de la boga monarca, se ha convertido en algo que ya llevamos 4 años de estar involucrados en este proyecto. Nosotros en casa, con mi familia, cada año hemos ayudado a por lo menos un poco más de 30 mariposas que hemos criado en casa. Ha sido una experiencia muy bonita porque hemos agarrado el cariño y hemos aprendido mucho sobre estas mariposas. Ha sido satisfactorio porque además hemos podido involucrar a algunas otras de nuestras familias, inclusive en México.
Yeah, and I remember that, it was not just about butterflies when we kind of introduced this to the parents. We don't know, we did birds and we did other topics, and I remember her son initially didn't want to touch, didn't want to participate, and I noticed that when we brought other presentations we did with Mike, and we had some birds, her son Ivan, he wanted to know about everything that was brought in. He wanted to know, and he wanted mom to explain, right? So like I said, it's a parallel. It's if children learning, children exploring, and then having parents be part of that. Parents being part of, oh, well, this is an egg, and this is an egg of an eagle, or this is an egg of, whatever. So moms also learning and exploring, maybe, and if they don't know, they can learn with their children. So I think this is a great experience. And then this is our home base educators. So bringing this into the home, right? So how do we how do we bring this to the home? So a lot of the home visitors, when we initiated, they were the coaches. They would bring in the monarchs or bring in the caterpillar into the home and coach the children. Coach, like, you know, you can hold it. What does it feel like? Again, learning vocabulary. And then how do we have the parents now role model or play in that child, right? And we saw a lot of children wanting to learn when the educator was there, but when it was parents doing it or when it was mom doing it, you saw the child's excitement. You know, like mom is doing it or dad is doing it. And I think sometimes that's also a little bit of our culture. We see that mom is predominantly the one that's there in supportive and caring or educating, and dad sometimes becomes that just the provider, right? Just the provider for their family, making sure that they have a roof over their head. But we saw that there were dads being involved, that there were dads also saying, I have stories too. And I did buildings at home in Mexico with my family, or I created toys out of the mud. You know, we had parents telling us, you know, back then I did toys out of mud. Those were my toys in my country. So it's getting everybody involved and starting from the parents. Like I said, looking at the child's face, you know, it's like, you know, look at the impact of a small project of learning the butterfly cycle. And you see the child's different perspective of enjoying the activity, learning the activities, learning vocabulary, and then parents as teachers. Our main goal is that parents know that they are the first teachers of their children. Us as educators are here to support and their learning and their development, but in reality, they are the teachers. They are the ones that know their children the best. They're the ones that explore. The mom here in the picture, she knew about the milkweed, you know, and she was the one teaching the child about the milkweed because she grew up with the milkweed and she knew about the milkweed. You know, and to her it was just second nature. Oh yeah, well this is milkweed, you know, and you're just blown away because you're like, well, I just learned it, you know. But they do it natural. So it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier about you know, citizen science. What is citizen science? Is it documentation? Well, I don't think our parents really document it, but they do it just natural, right? It's something that we just do. It's something that we grow. We plant trees. You know, you have trees, fruit trees. So they know about fruit trees. They know about the plants. And we provided some workshops with plants, and parents and families were, you know, I have a garden in my yard, and you know, I know about these plants, and I do also chiles, and I do tomatoes, but I also do other plants that I know for other insects. So it was really learning about what they're doing and then building on what they were doing and how we can support what they're doing, because it's much more impactful when you support what they're already doing. And then we see some parents, like I said, some dads also wanted to be part and take part of this experience. It wasn't just mom. It wasn't becoming just mom. It was becoming dads too, and raising and exploring with their children, and what are you learning, and what do I know, right? And how do I support you? So we did a lot of field trips as well. We did field trips with dad, exploring the outside, doing different things with them, dads jumping in leaves and children maybe just looking at them like, what are you doing, right? But yet, if you give them those experiences, then, you know, children will learn and children will have a different experience themselves. And then we had teachers, staff, everyone just, you know, buying into this monarch raising, people competing, like how many monarchs you had or how many caterpillars you were raising. So you have a picture of a teacher who had a lot of caterpillars and how they were not afraid to maybe touch them or make arrangements. We had a teacher who now has her own milkweed in her yard, and she provides and supports us with the monarchs and the eggs, and gives it to all the classrooms and all the teachers. So it's more than just it in the classroom. It's more than just that, right? And validating the parents' own experiences, because they have their own their own memories, their own participation, and dads just really now changing. And like I said, one of our barriers was also having dads understand that, you know, that when we have our parade for Dia del Niño, we've kind of merged that together with celebrating not just the children, but also celebrating the monarchs, the return of the migration back into the US. And some parents were not accepting of it. Some parents were not accepting of, why is my son going to have monarch wings, or why does my son have to have that, right? Because of the culture. So we saw changes. It was gradual, it took time, but both parents were being part of it. And mom saying, you know what, you're also part of this education of my child's life. And so we saw parents doing things together. You can see in the picture here, we had wing making, so that when we go out to our parades, every child have a wing, and moms had their wings. And it was everybody working together. We had a couple of single dads doing for their children. We had some grandparents doing their wings because they want their grandchildren to have their wings and be part of it. We do a lot of focus on literacy for our children. So our parents participate on bringing those stories to life, right? Not just reading a book for children, right? We learn through play. And it's one of the ways that we integrate with the children on literacy. So our parents provide plays, they bring the book to life. And, you know, it's everybody working together. Everything is made out of recycled material. It's not, we don't, you know, buy things. It's all made out of paper or cloth that they make, or if someone knows how to sew, you know, they collaborate together, and, you know, they say, I'll make the costumes, or I buy tela, or I have tela, I have sheets, and they bring it all together. So it's about the community. Again, it's not just one person, right? And it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier. It's about, I'm here, I migrated myself, this is just myself and my family, but it's building a community that will help you. And it's all done through these partnerships and done through the collaborations. So we also have children who are now in upper grades, but you know, they're the experts when they go to kindergarten, when they're in those younger ages. You know, we have a parent who said, you know, my child was the teacher's assistant, because when they talked about the monarch raising in the classroom, the child knew this all, you know, in kindergarten. And so she was the expert to the teacher and to the kids, right? I know when I started raising monarchs in the classroom, my son wanted to take some to his teacher. And I said, well, we have to teach her about it and show her, right? And he said to me, I thought everybody knows about how to raise monarchs. So to him, it was just becoming second nature. Like, everyone knows about monarch raising, and it's not, right? It's about making sure that everyone knows how to raise them. And then, like I said, learning that parents can do them themselves, that this is something that you don't have to buy. And then how do we continue that? Well, every year when we have the monarch celebration, or during the summer, everyone continues to raise and to look for milkweed. I know we talked about it the other day. We were talking about, you know, 2-year-olds are probably the ones with a good eye, you know, at that level, to walking down the street and say, I see an egg, right? Because they can identify them, because now that they've learned. So then, this is a little bit of how we started with the Dia del Niño parade. So we're celebrating the, you know, children, right? And April 30th is how we celebrate Dia del Niño. And one of our first beginnings, we had, again, I don't want my son to be a butterfly, right? So then accepting of, sure, he doesn't have to be a butterfly. You know, it can be anything you want. And then we saw this creativity of parents making caterpillars out of recycled stuff, and it was a leaf on cardboard, and the caterpillar that you see in his back there is it's like I don't know, like a wire tube, you want to call it, maybe, from the dryer, and then just painted with color. And we provide paint and material, and then you see the little girl with the wings from the workshops that we do with the families. So, you know, everybody taking part in being part of this. And, you know, and it's connecting that migration, right? How the monarchs migrate from here to Mexico. And it made a big connection with our families, right? Because our families, a lot of our families migrate from Mexico. So it was knowing that, you know, this is how they journey too, you know, and the small insect journeys and my family journeys, and how we're all in this journey together. And this is kind of more pictures. And like we said, our parades, we do different topics on the parades. We've done birds, and you can see on the right-hand side. We've also done owls. You can see some of our children, our parents, and then the little baby in the middle. Mom knitted that for her infant. Her infant is now, I believe he's like in 2nd grade, or 3rd grade. And then now we see dads. And now we see dads accepting of, it's okay for my son and it's okay for me, because monarchs are both male and female. So that's okay, you know, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time for them to really grasp it. And then at the end of the year, when the monarch's going back to Mexico, we do a big celebration. And you can see some of our coworkers inside the tent. We tag the butterflies to release them. And we have our children participating. I remember when we first started releasing monarchs, it was just by classrooms. Classrooms would go outside, teachers would bring their butterflies that they've tagged, and they would release in small groups, right? And now we do this every year, and you can see that it's a big preparation. It's for the monarch. Everyone who's raised monarchs or participated brings in their monarchs to release on that day to participate. Our adult programs come in to participate with us as well. So it's a community coming together to celebrate, you know, what science is, what nature is, and how we all collaborate in a small piece. I have last year, because of the pandemic, I know there are still families releasing. We did a virtual release, and there were a couple families that I know had still sent me information, and they told me, well, this year my sons and I, we released over 40 monarchs, and she has videos of the release with her children at home, right, because of the pandemic. But it takes a long time. And, you know, and we change it. This year we did trees, respecting nature, loving nature, hugging trees. So children are just accepting of it, and so are families. It's just very different now since we first started. And like I said, it's parents as teachers, having them explore the outdoors, parents enjoying nature. We have pictures of parents joining, doing toys out of trees. That was another workshop that we provided, and then staff also saying, you know, I used to do these toys in Mexico as well. And like I said, I had a mom who said, I used to jump on the branches in my pueblo, and I used to, you know, rock myself with the branches, and all the kids would jump on the branches of the tree. You know, things that maybe I don't do now with my child, but now I can expose them to more of the outdoors, and taking them out more and exploring and encouraging the child's creativity, right? On what can you do with nature? What can you do with a simple branch, right? And then so we initially started bringing those into the centers and providing trainings and workshops for parents. And then we took them out to the outdoors as well. It was more, when we did the outdoors, it was more of father's activities, going out and exploring, just dad. And mom, you know, was like, well, why can I go, or why can I explore, right? And then having dads teach children how to use the tools, or teach girls how to use the tools, because, you know, like I said, in cultures like girls don't do tools, or girls don't need to have those tools, right? But it was giving them the opportunity to say, yes, you know, girls can do this as well. All children can do it, right? And children, like I said, children of all abilities can be involved. Everyone can be involved, right? And it's about strengthening the community. So this is our monarch release now. And like I said, it started from classrooms individually going out, and now we have everyone participating, everyone releasing monarchs together and enjoying, and children, and everyone, all the little monarchs there with us too. So thank you.
Thanks, Beto. I'm turning it back over to Liza and Adrina to intro Trinity. And I think Beto encapsulated everything. I come in thinking it was about classrooms and youth and how it's just this, really they help just weave together all these components and that end result, art, nature, culture, and scientists. Those are all scientists, so thanks. Liza, should I introduce Trinity or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Well, I know we're running my time. So Trinity Pierce, she's the stewardship coordinator at the Chicago Region Trees Initiative based at Morton Arboretum. And Trinity is joining the partnership also integrating trees. She has a lot of expertise I do not have. And a lot of the families are excited. New themes you can see. And in part how we do it is there's a lot of trust and relationship building. And we have a lot of trust in Trinity and how her approach is with the community. So we're really excited to be working with her in the coming months. So Trinity, I'm turning it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. Can everyone see my title screen?
Yes.
Perfect. And thank you all for inviting me to join. This has been wonderful so far. So much food for thought, so much inspiration from everyone who's spoken thus far. You know, with El Valor, I had the opportunity to participate in a recent in-service day, and it was fantastic and so encouraging to see this inclusive education, this excitement around including not just the students, but the families. Thank you so much. So for my part, I'd also like to kind of look back at my pathway, especially thought process validation and kind of moving forward. This is such an important series. I'm looking forward to the Q&A as well, discussion and, you know, further discussions after this time. So this being just one path of many, but I'd like to start off with some validity challenges, something I deal with quite a bit, then moving into my specific pathway with a wonderful Canopy Chronicles program, and then looking more into citizen community science and engagement. We've talked a lot about some of these that exist and almost looking at them with kind of fresh eyes in who might we be excluding with these processes. And I want to get started, and I'm hoping this will translate. If you can see, I know there's going to be reflection, but this is the family farm up in Prairie Farm, Wisconsin. And this is where we would go every summer. It's a 7-hour drive up north. And I could just immerse myself in incredible natural areas. There was forest, there was a bog, there was very robust roadside wildflowers, as well as woodland wildflowers in the forest. And growing up, my family did not take trips to national parks. We didn't really go camping. So this was my natural experience. And I credit that time with helping me realize more and more that I wanted to spend time outdoors, but it felt almost insurmountable to get there. And I think looking back on that path, it seemed like there were so many more obstacles and challenges than there were opportunities. And I know lack of confidence is something I encounter when connecting with younger folks or even older people who are interested in a career change as green careers become more seemingly relevant, more accepted, more accessible. And I think even starting out, my thought process, my unique perspective, BIPOC, coming from not ingrained in conservation and stewardship, that almost felt like a disadvantage. And I was almost kind of starting from this inferior sense that, well, maybe I can make it even though I don't have ... And I think with those obstacles and challenges, underrepresentation, which has been covered so well, especially in the introduction, I think especially with Liza sharing that elite sense. And then also the sense of science as medical. Absolutely, that was the case too. My role as stewardship coordinator, that's not, you can't describe that in a one-word dentist or doctor or something. What is a stewardship coordinator is hard to describe even in an elevator speech. I think then too, with being a minority, that underrepresentation, it felt like a complete lack of representation, because the history of conservation I was learning, there were not BIPOC people in the small tunnel vision that I was finding, starting to do Google searches, starting to find library resources. So this is so important to have these dialogues and realize that the history is critical and has not been fully told. I think especially we're seeing more and more about food forests. And I don't know if you saw that incredible recent article in National Geographic about food forests stewarded by indigenous communities that have not been tended for a century, and yet they're still more sound, more productive, as opposed to land that was not tended by humans at all. And I think, again, it's just almost revolutionizing our thinking in terms of what is conservation and who is responsible, who can be our mentors. So I think it's interesting though, and I really appreciate the mentors I see here at this table, those who are leading this workshop, and many more that I've found as I get more and more into the field, in that my unique perspective, my different thought process, different way of learning is not an obstacle, it's not a disadvantage. That is who I am. It's reflected in my own heritage, my upbringing, and that I'm able to focus more on the joy than even the dread at times. I don't know if this is with you, if, going into a workshop or early on in one's career, it feels like there's so much you just don't know. And I think being able to earn that difficult experience, one internship at a time or one workshop at a time, but it does build. And I appreciate though that it can be exciting. And again, thinking of those wings, that is just phenomenal, the inclusive aspect of that for all children. I know we keep saying this, but like, oh, if only I had that program when I was in grade school, that would have been so helpful. But still, the fact that this kind of webinar and this perspective helps us realize there's so much more to learn, but it's not at a deficit. It's very much just adding to kind of our community sense of learning, and that we can really kind of help build each other up. And I think that's what keeps me excited, even though I still, on any given day, I can hit all of those obstacles if someone's really leaning on me to be a token in something where I say, I really only have my perspective, but who else is going to speak up for this segment of the population? But the mentors in and around these fields and community has been huge for me. So I wanted to jump then into Canopy Career Chronicles, which is a fantastic program created by the Morton Arboretum. It's actually in a storybook format. And what it does is jump into these different pathways in science. And what I really like about this, I enjoyed participating with Dinah, and she's 1, 2, 3. She's 4 from the right, yes, plants. Part of my story is her story. And I am going to just click this so you can see. It's wonderful for, again, younger folks, but also those who are interested in a career change, or as we've seen that inclusive nature, it's not just folks who've recently retired, it's the whole gamut of ages who can participate in citizen and community science. It's retirees, it's folks who, are much older, much younger. So here you can see, you can have kids or anyone take a quiz, kind of going through what's of interest, and then you can explore the conservation advocate. And then again, it's in that kind of storybook model, which is really enjoyable to go through. And for me, one of the main things about this is that it's not just BIPOC, it's also different pathways. So many of these folks had no idea what they wanted to do, but they made their way, which I really enjoy. And some of the key kind of milestones for me, I think, for instance, going through this story was that kind of I had an idea that, oh, I enjoy spending time outdoors so much up in Prairie Farm, Wisconsin. That's when the hours would just fall away. This is what I wanted to do. I could actually make a career out of this. I did not know this in high school. I didn't have a sense of this in undergrad going for history because I enjoy the history, often fraught, of our relationship with the land. But I'm not going to be a historian. But again, that would have been easier to be able to say I'm a historian, as opposed to I think I'm going to be a stewardship coordinator. So I found that that sounded great, but then it was like, oh, am I kind of, just pigeonholing myself into one type of work? And I think having a lack of mentors in conservation and stewardship, lack of seeing that representation made for a lot of insecurity and doubts. And again, that sense of not just underrepresentation, which we hear a lot about more, to me, it totally felt like there was none. Where are these people? And I think even more so, something that could have really had me go down a different path was there were so many topics of interest, but there were many more well-intentioned doubters, kind of like, oh, I didn't know you had an engineering mindset. I didn't get that sense from you. Or, oh, do you have an art background? And these kind of little chips, but it was still important to just keep moving forward to figure out what is it that I want to do. And I think the term jack of all trades became more and more apparent to me that there can be ways to do more than just one field. And I think urban forestry inherently, as we've learned, especially in terms of volunteer tree planting, it's community engagement. And then, yes, maybe you happen to plant trees, but there's also outreach component. So much connected, but it's really hard to start out at square one and say, exactly, that's what I'm going to do, and here are my stops along the way. I think too, I really appreciated the point about kind of the right clothes, and even I didn't have the garb. I didn't have steel-toed boots for work settings, and how that could make me feel inferior so quickly. And trying to identify those ahead of planting events, ahead of workshops, who might not have the right clothing, who, for instance, may have their school uniform, and they don't want to have that messed up at a planting, which is a totally different setting than sitting at a desk and learning. I think also the right slang. It's so easy for us to fall into that once we finally earned our place in conservation stewardship. I know I've caught myself using that slang because it's confidence boost to connect with someone, but who else is being excluded by using that? And then I think too, again, kind of that no mechanical tinkering background. I really appreciated that, how in some cases, parents could step into that role of helping, especially young girls outdoors, utilizing tools, because that was not something that was necessarily thought of traditionally, and how important that is. So I think even though I was getting the sense of jack of all trades, it was very much a roller coaster, because then it was like, but I can't do this. It was so easy to kind of have such doubts, not being able to visualize my path because there was no precedent. And I think the token expectations, the more I was able to get into the field, the more apparent it was that there were very few BIPOC folks. So it was almost a double whammy. If, being a token in an area where you don't already feel that confident was very stressful. But I keep coming back to community and mentors and building these networks like the folks we have in this space today, and that it was okay not to know everything, and it was okay to kind of lean on and learn from other folks. And that made such a difference to me, because I did start to see more and more folks, kind of different pathways, more and more BIPOC folks, that it was not a strain to participate in a conversation. I don't know about you, but there have been not that many times in strictly professional settings where it's been an inclusive space, where there's been entirely BIPOC folks at the table. And it is so wonderful that that is increasing, and that it's not always the exception to the rule. And I think that's so wonderful, because it validates my thought process. It validates the fact that I can come from this different pathway, and I don't have to try and learn one typical kind of academia slant. I can bring these different ways of nature, of valuing community to the table. And I think those similar passions for nature and science is so key. Grad school absolutely was huge for me in terms of BIPOC mentors right in front of me, wonderful professors doing wonderful research, writing books, and here it was right in front, and it felt like it took a while. I just wasn't in the right spheres to know that they'd been doing this work for some time, but I never would have found them without this experience. And that representation, I just yearn for it more and more and more so that we can showcase it to younger students. We can showcase it in a lot of our volunteer tree plantings. How are we connecting with local folks who are already doing this work, who are representing and can help us inspire the next generation of green jobs? But even if you're not in a green job, there's so many ways, as we know, to advocate in urban forestry. So it's not as if I've made it and all, rainbows and shiny things. Acceptance is critical, but I know that, again, those obstacles and challenges, I can get hit with those still today, which sometimes throws me off because it feels like, well, I've come so far, I see my mentors, and that's when I kind of gravitate to these types of things, kind of say, here is this community, here I am valid. My learning, my thought process absolutely deserves a seat at the table just as any others. And this is not a fluke. Sometimes I do feel like, well, if I hadn't gotten that email at that time, or if I didn't happen to Google this stewardship word, I may not have figured this out, but it's not a fluke. And we're all meant to be where we are, and we can make such a difference. So moving away from the Canopy Career Chronicles, I'd like to just take a look at some of the community engagement opportunities that I work in and around a lot. I'm either kind of highlighting these, I'm sharing, co-leading walks using these, but I really appreciated that this talk was an opportunity to say, let's take kind of again, that fresh look at some of these tried and true citizen science methods, and in what ways might we be inclusive, or might we be exclusive without intending to? So one of the more successful outreach materials we use is a tree tag kit. And the tree tag kit is full of these 11 by 17 tree tags. You can put them onto trees and you can find the ecosystem services for them. It's wonderful because we distribute them widely in the region, and then folks can decide they want to highlight trees, how they want to highlight them. We've even had folks taping pictures or other mementos to these tags that kind of draw folks in their own community. We do still also have these tree tag kits available if anyone's interested. They're great for spring, they're great for fall. Please feel free to contact me with these resources. So here then is a perfect example of these tree tags in action, and we utilize iTree. So iTree smartphone app, also you can find it online, the go-to for calculating ecosystem services for trees. But it's a little difficult to find unless somebody is sharing it with you. It doesn't automatically come up necessarily in Google searches. And I wonder, how can we make that more accessible? What I really like here is that once these are up, anyone can come up. This is a wonderful garden in North Lawndale community of Chicago. Anyone can come up to these, learn more about the tree, and then kind of a URL with next steps. In what ways have you utilized tree tags? What has made them more effective in your perspective? Then I think community tree plantings, again, that community sense. There was a community tree tagging. Anyone can walk up to these trees to learn more. Community tree planting, we know we have to connect with local organizations, local point people to understand, can we support their work? It's not just our agenda that we're kind of trying to get across and then move on to the next thing. Another wonderful program is the Natural Areas Conservation Training Program out of the Morton Arboretum. And here you can see the courses involved. You don't have to be enrolled to take courses. You can just take one or two. These are a more sophisticated, accessible, blended in some cases where it's not just in person. It can also be online only, which was really important for during the pandemic, but there is a paywall. It costs money to maintain these more and more sophisticated engagement education platforms. And there's a wonderful scholarship through the Volunteer Scholarship Network. But are we getting it out to the right folks? How are we communicating these kinds of courses, which I know taking a few of these courses early on, big confidence boost for me. It also helps that these are validation. They have, for instance, certificates, criteria in, I think, International Society of Ecological Restoration. So you can utilize these credits for other programs. Here then is just a snapshot of that online view. Another wonderful program I'm quite excited about is our Canopy Counts program. And here we're looking at the Pullman neighborhood in Chicago, an inventory project. Canopy or Curio XYZ is a global tree recording program. They've recorded just under 2.5 million trees worldwide. And we're very excited to partner with them to focus in our Chicago region. So it's wonderful here as we can go from that 7-county region all the way down to the street neighborhood scale, which is so critical for engagement. Here too, we can see a snapshot in really great, clear infographics, what's going on in that window we were looking at. And we can see what species we have, as well as the health of the trees. Very excited that anyone interested can simply explore these maps online or via smartphone, or they can also record a tree and specifically, excitingly, plantable location. So where a tree could go, kind of starting that conversation, them stepping into that engagement role. Hopefully we can meet them and help get a tree there. So no, this is Hope D. Wall School in Aurora. It's a wonderful school that has a significant program for kids with disabilities who are able to now access a wonderful green space. We partnered with Dream Build Play Experience, a nonprofit that retrofits traditional playgrounds into universal access playgrounds. So what a great partnership. They focus on that inclusive play space, and we're able to plant trees on the perimeter. You can see these different colored dots show different species. And here then is what I really want to highlight, this story section, this picture. What really pushed us over the edge with Curio was that there's this anecdotal section, this story section. It's not just about the tree data. We've talked a lot about that. How do people get excited about trees? Valuation of trees is not just carbon stored. We know that. It could be like my cherished childhood memories of the sugar maple, the huge sugar maple. I don't know if you can see it. I should scan this picture. You can see that huge tree right behind the farmhouse, just larger than life. And that's something I would love to share, even if I'm not sure what the DBH is. For me, the valuation is the fact that tree has been there as long as I can remember. Now, something else that's come up quite a bit is iNaturalist, a fantastic crowdsourcing space for learning not just about trees, but all kinds of animals, mushrooms, etc. Is this an inclusive space? Again, I know you need to have that smartphone, or you need to have access to the internet. Are you seeing ways in which there's kind of welcoming workshops, or how can we make this more accessible for folks? Because I know it's my go-to, but who am I excluding by kind of just mentioning iNaturalist and then kind of moving on? I think also more specifically in Chicago region, Open Lands Tree Keeper program's fantastic. Inclusive space, anyone interested can take this course. And I remember when I took my Tree Keeper course, I loved coming to class every day because of the diverse community. There were people with such wide-ranging backgrounds, not just urban forestry or science. It made for such a wonderful, fascinating discussion space as we learn more about trees. Conservation at home, conservation at work, and I think there's even a conservation at school now, is a great way to focus with residents or community gardens, kind of again at that neighborhood scale. But if you're from this area, are you familiar with this? What are some obstacles to connecting with you? I've been doing a lot of visits in the Palos region with wonderful partners, Kristen Flores, Val Kehoe, and Nina Baki, as part of a study to understand how are we able to connect with these residents, especially in that area. Buckthorn and honeysuckle are rampant, and there are larger residential plots that can really help to control those invasives. So that was just a quick run through first of that path and then some of that community engagement aspects. But thank you again so much for having me here. I really appreciated this time. There's so much reflection to be had, and I look forward to discussing more with you. If you have any questions, ideas, resources, some of which I shared, please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to talk more about this. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Trinity, for that wonderful presentation. Thank you, all our panelists, for your presentations. It was just excellent to kind of hear about your experiences, your work experience, your personal experiences, and your insights on all these topics. So, I mean, we were hoping for a little more time for discussion, but that's okay. We're going to take a couple of questions in a minute, just to recap in terms of the topics we talked about today. We talked about types of citizen science, types of activities, sort of the formal versus informal aspects, youth and community engagement, family education and knowledge sharing, bridging communities and science, and the inclusion of women. And it was interesting to kind of see some of the underlying themes that you all raised through your presentations in different ways, like building confidence, reciprocity and collaboration, validation and sentiment, and trust in relationships, which was a huge thing that stood out for me. So thank you all of you for that, for your wonderful presentations and sharing. We don't have time to go back to our Jamboard, which is what we wanted to do, but I am just throwing the link in there. You're welcome to take a look at it. People have contributed before and throughout the session today. I'm just going to open it up now for a couple of questions. If anyone has any questions for any of our panelists or wants to share their insights in general, please feel free to do that now.
And I think, Adrina, we would love for you to turn on your video at this time if you're comfortable to ask your questions. Yes, Georgia, welcome.
Hi, my comment question is for Trinity. I really enjoyed, I enjoyed all the presentations, but Trinity's in particular, and I liked the sort of third or the last section of the presentation where you, Trinity, kind of talked about the utility or the effectiveness of these various community science projects and how it's not enough to sort of create a tool, but to think about how people can access the tool and make it a part of their lives, which I think is something that Vero spoke to quite well. And I'm curious then, since you both spoke about pathways, so then this is a question for both Vero and Trinity. How are you thinking about the kind of like person life cycle from birth all the way to seniorhood and getting people to really embed habitat conservation and natural history observation as almost like a natural part of how they live their lives? Thanks.
Well, that's phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing. And that's so important to think of our own phenophases. And I know El Halor is doing such a wonderful job with early childhood. And I think as folks get older, though, it's not as if you had your one career and that's it. We know that stewardship takes many forms, and it doesn't just have to be with a scientist cap. And we've seen that, I think, with the incredible outpouring of natural areas restoration stewardship, especially in the Chicago region. It's phenomenal to find these volunteers who may, again, with that observation skill, have spent hours, weeks, years in just even like a 0.2 acre space. And they know it backwards and forwards, yet there's always more for them to learn. So I think that is key. And I think it's not, I even have a stereotype of the kind of folks I'm trying to connect with, whether it's be, early career, kind of middle school, high school, to help them see what we didn't always see when we were younger, but oftentimes kind of forgetting about the seniors who are not as embedded in conservation and natural areas volunteerism. I know we just did a wonderful volunteer tree inventory at a retirement community last week with the Curio app. And it was so empowering to hear folks who self-described, oh, I don't really know much about trees, but could readily say, you know, oh, well, that's not a maple, let's focus on the oak. So empowering folks in every life cycle, phase is so important. And I'd love to learn more about how we can encourage seniors, how we can encourage folks to be stewards as it makes sense for their own amount of time they have, where they're located. But that's such a great question. And I'll turn it over to Veronica, but thanks again.
Yeah, I think we have seen some parents that have taken it on under their wing. And there's actually a group of moms that were part of our agency, and they have created their own kind of like a club of moms and raising monarchs, and still having their children be part of that, and involving them in the community of raising the monarchs. So they're reaching out to other people that we're not reaching out to, right? And I guess for our end, or my perspective, is just giving the parents that opportunity to see that there's more careers out there, that there's a lot more to explore, and the more exposure that you have your child in gives them a better idea of maybe what they want to pursue, and if this is part of their passion, maybe they can, and guiding them a little more of where those professionals and what kind of careers there are in that field. We used to have a summer camp program. My daughter was part of that program, and I remember when she did those summer programs, she loved touching the frogs and touching the insects and things like that I wasn't exposed to, right? And you know, she was interested in following that career and that pathway. So I think for us, we see that parents are giving their children that opportunity to say, you know, science is not just in the medical field. Science is also conservation in nature, and there's opportunities and to be in those fields. You know, or if it's not conservation, it's any aspect. There could be other careers that they want to choose. But I think for our end is that we still have to maybe work a little more. We do also work with summer interns that are city job paid, and the interns come in, and we teach them also about conservation, and because maybe they weren't exposed to it as well when they were younger. And some of the comments I hear from them, it's like, wow, I didn't know about that we have owls in the city, or we have you know, trees, or what kind of trees are in my neighborhood. I'd never paid attention, right? So it's just continuing giving them that awareness to the community and to everyone we really touch. But I think the parents just take it under their wing, you know, and they continue to do this with their children and touch other people. I don't know if that answers your question, but
thank you both.
Thank you, Georgia, for the question. Thank you both for your wonderful responses. Any other questions at this time? Liza, do you see any hands up? Just scrolling.
I'm scrolling through. I don't see any hands up, but I do wanted to share. I do want to share something really briefly, which is, you know, also in many places around the world, when people teach science in schools, we teach the how of science, right? We teach how does this grow from seed to tree. My dad called me last night, and we were talking about this session today, and he's like, you know, what's missing really is the sense of wonder, the why. Why are we engaged? And I think that's something that for me, in terms of citizen science and in terms of the question from Georgia, it's so key to start that at such a young age, is to create that sense of wonder and the why we're pursuing the science, and that it is not a standalone subject, that it is incorporated along with everything else, or as Tamberly mentioned in the chat, it's part of an ecosystem of personhood and an ecosystem of learning.
Thanks, Liza. Yeah, and I guess one of the things, I think, Liza, you mentioned it in the chat. I like this sort of, what is the point of view from a 2-year-old? My daughter's almost 2, and looking at, again, that sense of wonder, looking at the world through her eyes has re-inspired me, and brought that kind of wonder back into my work, because it's sort of like learning through their eyes, and relearning the way we think about nature, and the way we think about our own biases and perspectives on nature is just incredible to see through the eyes of our children. So again, kind of doing that more intentionally with them, and giving them those opportunities, and just speaks to what Trinity had talked about and what Veronica reiterated just now, giving them those opportunities, and that knowledge sharing piece is just, it's so important, because I too didn't grow up with that kind of direction in that way through my family. Liza switched our slide. We have 4 minutes left in our session. It's the end of our journey. We always say for now, because the journey continues. This is a monthly discussion series, and we really want to sort of thank you all, and we hope that you can join us for our next session, which is going to be on June 16th, same time, and it's going to focus on women and research. I've just put the link into the chat if you'd like to register for that session. So we hope you can join us for that. And Liza, just switch the slide, if you will. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And we want to thank our panelists today. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Trinity. Thank you, Mike. It's so nice to hear and feel validated. Mike, you mentioned that in the chat, that it's one of the biggest rewards is to feel validated. As a woman and someone who was a nerdy know-it-all, who loves science but loves other subjects as well, it feels really good to hear the different perspectives and to see where citizen science is going and how inclusive it's even becoming more and more inclusive over time. So I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to thank my co-host Adrina for sharing in this journey with me.
Thank you, Liza. I think you know, it's this really, more than anything for us, has been a learning experience, learning from each other, putting this series together, and especially our panelists and participants. And the hope, I feel like we should make them longer, Liza, after today's session. But thank you all so much for your insights, for your time, for your contributions, and caring to come and join us today. And please continue the conversations online. We do have, I've just put a few links in the chat, the ones that are on the slide that are up here. And so we do have all the sessions are posted on our YouTube channel. We have a shared Google Drive for resources. If you have links, resources, programs that you want to share, please feel free to send them to our email, which is just at the top there, and we'll put them together and put them in the Google Drive for other participants to see. And we have 2 Facebook groups where we encourage you to continue these conversations online. So one is on women, is for women in urban natural resources. It's not just for women, so men of course can join and contribute to the conversations, and moms. The other one is for moms in urban natural resources, and we encourage dialogue on sort of as our work relates to parenting and and sort of bridging that gap and the child engagement portion. So thank you all again, and please connect with us if you have ideas for future presentations or panels that you would like to see us curate. Please do connect and let us know what those might be, and we're happy to always continue this conversation. So thank you, and thank you so much, Liza.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.